Virginia's Eastern Shore. I hope you guys are having a lovely day wherever you're signing in from. And if not, we've got a nice hour to transport you to something lovely. It is noon. We'll give just a few more seconds to let folks sign in. Glad to have you with us today. Well, hi, everyone. We hope we find you and your loved ones safe and well today, and we thank you for joining us for the 7th in this series of live webinars offered by the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy. This time we're featuring a presentation from Blair Smyth, Director of the Allegheny Highlands Landscape Program. I'm Margaret Van Cleef, Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy's Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve Program, and I'll be your moderator today. I would like to briefly touch on some logistics before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to revisit any information you may have missed or would like to hear again. You'll also be able to share the link after the fact with any friends who may be interested. While we can't see or hear you, we would love to hear from you. And you are invited to submit your questions through the Q&A function, which our team will vet and share with Blair to answer live following the presentation. To find this function, just move your mouse and look to the bottom of your screen. Several options should appear, including one that says Q&A with a little dialogue icon. Please click that icon and submit your questions there. We ask that you refrain from submitting your questions via the chat function, as they may be lost there, and instead use the Q&A so that we are sure to see them in time. And the reason they could get lost in the chat function is just because some other conversation can go on there as well, and we just want to make sure we capture all of your questions so that Blair and his team can answer them after the fact, and that is why we ask you to use the Q&A. But please do look to the chat for helpful links our team might share there and other information. We'll get to as many questions as possible in the period allotted, and we will include Blair and his team's responses in our follow-up to any questions that remain. So with that, I'll hand it over to our State Director, Locke Ogans, who will introduce herself and our speakers. Hey, Locke.
Thank you, Margaret, and welcome everybody. It is really great to have you here and have so many people with us. And I can't believe this is our 7th webinar. I also can't believe we're almost a year through COVID, but we really have found this an effective way to get people more acquainted with our work, and we really appreciate you being here. And before we start with today's webinar, I wanted to let you know that March the 30th will be our 8th one, and we are going to be discussing developments in solar siting in Virginia, which is a very hot topic. You probably know that right now. And we're going to have a discussion about our first of its kind model for Virginia that shows how to protect our important land and also make room for solar at the same time. And we've been doing quite a bit of work in that area and look forward to sharing it with you. We couldn't do any of the work that we do without your support, and we are very, very grateful for it. And you're about to hear today about one of our exciting main landscapes that we work in Virginia, which is our chapter's Allegheny Highlands Program. And you're going to hear about restoration and protection in this beautiful place in the Appalachian Mountains. And you're going to learn really firsthand what our great staff is doing in the face of climate change, not only to protect this land, but to be sure that it's able to be there and be a good home for nature, and also provide important benefits for people in the years to come as the climate changes. This is a super good time right now to be talking about our Allegheny Highlands program, because it's one of several pieces of work that we do in the Appalachians. And I'm really happy to say that the Appalachians as a whole have been chosen by the Nature Conservancy as one of 4 global focal areas where we are going to be really accelerating our work because of the importance, and you'll hear about why that's important soon. And we're in really good company with the Amazon, with Kenya, and with Borneo. And then the Central Appalachians, which you're going to hear, this program is right smack in the middle of the Central Appalachians, is the fourth global focal area because of its diversity and of its ability to help us combat climate change. So with that, I want to introduce you to Blair Smyth, who is our main speaker today, and he is the director of our Allegheny Highlands program. He joined TNC in 2019, and he has a background as a wildlife biologist, and he's worked with several universities and state agencies. We all love the fact that he works a lot with bears, so he's always has his great bear stories, and that's really super. And now what he does for us is he works with a range of partners, including the U.S. Forest Service, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the Department of Wildlife Resources to increase forest restoration across the whole Allegheny Highlands region. Blair's going to be joined by Jean Lorber, who is our conservation scientist in Virginia, specializing in forest ecology and land protection for our Virginia chapter, although his expertise is used by our colleagues across the Conservancy and with our partners as well. And he's also going to be joined by Nikole Simmons, who is our restoration coordinator, and Laurel Schablein, who is our conservation coordinator, both of whom specialize in this particular landscape, but also their work carries far beyond our chapter. Their expertise is amazing. So I can't wait for you to meet this great team. And with that, Blair, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks a bunch, Lot. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blair Smyth, and today we are going to talk about our restoration vision that drives the conservation work that we do over in the Allegheny Highlands. We couldn't do any of it without people. I'm lucky to be able to work as part of a great team based in Lexington, Virginia. This is the rest of the team that Locke just introduced. We've got Nikole Simmons, Laurel Schablein, and Jean Lorber. They're all members of our prescribed fire operations staff and responsible for all of our science, conservation, and stewardship work across the Allegheny Highlands. They're going to be with us on the webinar today and available to answer your questions at the end. So where are the Allegheny Highlands? Well, here's a map of where we work in Virginia. This is our program boundary. We're located up in the northwest corner of Virginia, and we cover a large portion of Bath, Highland, and Rockingham counties. Our main presence in this landscape is our Warm Springs Mountain Preserve, which is located here in red. The main contiguous parcel is roughly 7,300 acres. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the Homestead Resort, which is located in Hot Springs, Virginia. That's right here with the star. The dark green that you see is all actually land that's publicly owned by the United States Forest Service. We share 13 miles of boundary on the east side of Warm Springs Mountain, and that has led to some amazing partnership and collaboration on a variety of research and projects. So why are we so interested in working in this part of the world? As you can see here, in looking at this map of biodiversity hotspots, the central and southern Appalachians really are among the most biodiverse areas in the United States. Working to continue to maintain this biodiversity is a key piece of what we do. This is our Migrations in Motion map. It's a great graphic created by a team at TNC Global that depicts the shifts in a variety of species of animal in response to a changing climate. You can kind of see mammals in pink, birds in blue, and amphibians in yellow. And what this map depicts is as climate change occurs, we know that species will need the ability to move both north and south, as well as up and down in elevation. The Appalachians provide the ability to do that and really becomes a climate change pathway for the entire eastern United States. So as we think about our work that we do, how do we conserve this landscape that both sustains biodiversity and provides ecosystem benefits, while also allowing nature to rearrange in response to a changing climate? As we talk about our work today, one key concept for everybody to remember is that disturbance drives diversity. Our forests have been and are still shaped by disturbances across the landscape. So these natural disturbances are major drivers in biodiversity. So each of these, whether it's a pest or pathogen like a southern pine beetle, wind events like tornadoes or derechos, ice storms and fires all change the landscape. In some cases, these are only minor changes and only impact small discrete portions of the forest. However, in other cases, these events are widespread and can cause large changes across large portions of the forest. The key thing to remember, though, is that they do change the forest. They change the structure and the composition. And in some cases, these events can reset or start over the successional processes that are occurring. So let's begin with an exercise. If you will, picture yourself in a forest you've walked in, a forest you've spent time in, preferably up in the mountains of Virginia. So I'll give you just a minute to do that. So as you're picturing that forest, is it shady or does it have lots of sunlight coming down through the trees like you see over here on the right? Are there lots of densely packed trees and lots of trees in the mid-story? Or is it more open like a park? Are there shrubs so dense that it's really hard to even walk through? Is there a grassy understory that has wildflowers everywhere? All of these photos are photos of our forest and forest types, but they don't occur equally across our landscape. A large portion of our forest in the western part of Virginia is kind of this closed canopy, really densely packed forest. The trees go close together and there's just a really limited amount of light hitting the forest floor. And while it's an important feature on the landscape and is used by a variety of species, including these forest interior warblers, to maximize biodiversity of both plants and animals, we need more of the other forest puzzle pieces as well. So here's an example. Let's look at where this shady closed canopy forest occurs. This image is created from satellite measurements of forest canopy over in Bath County and represents roughly 500,000 acres here. You will see the majority of it is dark green that represents that closed canopy forest. And while it's an important forest stage, what you don't see very much of is the young forests that are highlighted in pink. There's just a few of them out there, and some of the open canopy woodlands depicted in yellow. The forest that supports the most biodiversity has a mixture of all these conditions. So let's learn more about what these missing types of forests are looking like and how do we get more of them back on the landscape. So here's an example of that young forest. You can notice the open structure. There aren't a lot of big trees out in it. You can see patches of young oak starting to come up and a large amount of herbaceous vegetation, including a lot of variety of grasses, forbs, shrubs, and wildflowers. So here's a couple examples of oak woodlands, another type of forest. This would have been depicted in yellow on one of the previous slides. So these areas still have a lot of large trees, but they're much more spaced out. And there are many more species of herbaceous plants down at the ground level because of all the sunlight hitting the forest floor. These herbaceous plants provide a huge variety of food and cover for numerous species of wildlife. But back to the disturbance piece of the puzzle. The early and open types of forest are only created with some sort of disturbance. Well, here's one example of how our controlled burning program is helping drive diversity changes in songbirds.
In the course of their work, Nikole Simmons and Laurel Schablein will encounter black bears, bobcats, and coyotes. That's always a thrill. But the real excitement comes in reviewing the medium and long-term data they've compiled.
We've seen an increase in species since 2011. We've seen an increase in number of individuals. We've seen an increase in diversity.
In the mountains of Bath County, I'm Sandy Houseman.
And as an exciting update to this project, just in the past few months, Laurel, Nikole, and Jean have all worked with Dr. Dana Marin, a professor down at Mississippi State University, to publish the first of two academic papers on a decade of this songbird research in the Journal for Forest Ecology and Management. So researchers have found that plant diversity, mostly grasses and wildflowers, increased by 50 to up to 500% where woodlands are restored back to the right sites. So if you'll look at these two photos above, they were taken from the exact same spot, but 8 years apart. And you can see, notice this tree with the hole in the bottom here on the left. So what happened? Well, a timber thinning starting the process took out a few of those big trees, and then prescribed fire was put on the landscape 3 different times over that 8-year period. And you'll notice how much more open this site is. You'll see lots of grasses, lots of wildflowers, lots of plants that are great for pollinators. So it really just is a huge benefit to biodiversity to have more diverse types of habitat across the landscape. The absence of these woodlands on our landscape is just one legacy of human management over the past 150 years. The suppression of fire is another legacy, and it has created some very profound changes. So let's talk a little bit more about fire. This is a cross-section of a tree from Kelly Mountain over in Augusta County. Using data from the trees' rings, it was determined that the tree started growing back in 1821. And if you'll look at each of these years across the tree rings, you'll see these black marks. Those are actually called fire scars. And those actually show where a fire moved across the tree's outer bark in each of those years. So that you can see in about 100 years, at least 11 fires burned in this area. And through this dendrochronology work, through pollen studies, and through historical records, we know that fires were moving over these mountains roughly every 5 to 7 years. The fires that were moving across the mountains then were not like the fires we're seeing out west right now. The fires we're talking about here were burn hot in some areas and kill some trees, create pockets of young forest. In other areas, they kill a few trees, create more of that oak woodlands that we were talking about. But in many areas, they just burn cool underneath the canopy and really not have very much impact. They were very patchwork and created a variety of ages and structures across the landscape. So what changed here after 1922? Well, the United States Forest Service and the state agencies really ramped up fire suppression and would try to extinguish fires as soon as they were reported. So it cut down a huge amount on the amount of fire on the landscape. So what does fire have to do with it? Showing you this photo again. If you'll look at it closely, the left side of the road has not seen fire. And you see a closed canopy of overstory trees. You see a real dense midstory of saplings. The midstory is a mixture of maple, poplar, and other fire intolerant species. On the right side of the road, it's the exact same forest system. The only difference here is that fire has been on this landscape. And to that end, there's fewer large trees. You don't see that dense midstory. You do see a lot of sunlight hitting the forest floor, creating a great spot for grasses, wildflowers, and actually there's a ton of young oak trees that are coming up out here. So this diversity of both forest structure and competition is vital to maintaining this across the landscape. The understory portion of the forest is actually extremely important, as it is likely the future overstory dominant trees. And so what we're seeing in many of these systems that have had fire removed from them is that the small trees, the saplings and seedlings, the babies, don't look like the overstory dominant trees, the parents. So if you look at this chart on the left, it shows that these larger trees are the parents. And over 60% of those are oak, there's 12% pine, and only a quarter of them are other species. However, if you look at the smaller trees, the seedlings and saplings, you'll see these are almost 90% other species. Oaks only make up about 13%, and the pines completely disappeared. So what's going on here? I'll leave it to Jean to explain that to us.
And how it's shaping the forest. So what I have in front of me is a small red maple seedling about 6 inches tall and a scarlet oak seedling about the same height. These two species have different strategies. Red maple can handle low light, and they don't put a lot of resources towards their roots. They want to grow up. They want to grow tall quickly. Oaks, on the other hand, adapted to disturbance, put a lot of resources into their roots, waiting, expecting really, to be disturbed, to experience fire. And so the result of that, when you don't have fire, is that the maples are rewarded. And you can see that this little red maple can grow just as tall as the oak with just a small root system. I'm going to predict when I dig up this oak, it's going to have a much larger root system. And lo and behold, it does. So this dynamic, this interaction between these two species is at the heart of a big change that's coming to Appalachia.
So without fire, maples will continue to outcompete oaks and could possibly win the race to be the top tree in our future forests. So let's talk more about our conservation vision. We really want to restore forest conditions that will increase big picture biodiversity and maintain these oak and pine species that are so important into the next generation of our future forests. We use fire not only because it used to be an integral part of the ecosystem, but also because it increases diversity of the forest and benefits a wide variety of different groups of plant and animal species. So what is TNC doing about this? We help plan, implement, and study forest restoration across hundreds of thousands of acres on federal, state, and TNC lands. So how do we do this? We use a variety of strategies, including our traditional land protection, We also participate in the planning and implementation of forest restoration projects. But just doing the restoration project isn't enough. We've got to use science to look back at the actions we're taking, to assess our work and make sure we're having the outcomes we are looking for. Are there things we can do better? Are there things we can do differently to help achieve more of those results? So we'll talk a little bit about our land protection work. In the 1920s, the Inglis family purchased Warm Springs Mountain to prevent development on the ridgetop over the Homestead Hotel and Resort. Well, in 2002, the Nature Conservancy purchased Warm Springs Mountain from Virginia Hot Springs Company to continue that legacy. It protects not only the scenic views and drinking water supply for the homestead and the surrounding Warm Springs Valley, but also continues to provide research and outdoor recreation opportunities, as well as being the backbone of our forest restoration work in Western Virginia. Another great project we just did, it's another recent land protection project we worked on up in the Laurel Fork portion of Highland County. We were lucky enough to work with this amazing landowner to permanently protect just over 1,800 acres of amazingly diverse habitats. It's got everything. It's got red spruce and Appalachian bogs up on the very top. Got some beautiful stands of northern hardwoods. And then it's got over 2.5 miles of this wetland stream corridor. It's got braided streams and beaver ponds, beaver dams everywhere that provide great aquatic habitat for a variety of species. So here's a photo of Fitz, the landowner that had the vision behind the protection of this piece of property up in Highland County. Fitz recognized how unique this property was when he purchased it back in 1972. And his love of the land and generosity means that we can maintain this amazing place for the plants and animals that live there, and for many more people to connect with nature. Really, our success with all our strategies is dependent on people who value nature services, and we couldn't even begin to do that work without bringing together partners from state and federal agencies to collaborate. Our restoration and fire management strategy will not work without buy-in from public land agencies. The complexities of restoring health to our forest and burning large, meaningful blocks requires as many perspectives as we can bring to the table. We work together to strategically address any barriers, to build our collective knowledge, and to fill any knowledge gaps that allow us to make decisions based on science. TNC staff here in Virginia lead and manage our fire learning networks, both here in the state, but also across the Central Appalachians. The Central Appalachians Fire Learning Network engages federal, state, and private land managers in a collaborative effort to enhance capacity to implement ecological fire management in the Central Apps. We maximize opportunities to learn together and to set priorities and plan for success. This occurs through a variety of local workshops and many shared learning events, field tours, and informal meetings. It also means we get together on the fire line and actually put the fire on the ground and get to do these big landscape level burns. So back to this map of Warm Springs Mountain. Again, notice the amount of shared boundary we've got on our eastern side up against the United States Forest Service. So after we purchased the mountain in 2002, we began to plan for burning across our ownership boundaries, since fire historically would not have recognized those lines. So our first cooperative burn took place in 2008. We had 2 partners and was only about 150 acres. However, 4 years later, we would tackle the largest Nature Conservancy Forest Service burn east of the Mississippi at 5,800 acres. And today we have at least 5 partner agencies on every burn that we attend. People show up on other agencies' burns if they were their own. It doesn't matter whose uniform you wear, doesn't matter who owns the lands you're standing on. Everyone has realized that cooperation is the only way forward towards landscape scale restoration. And here's Nikole Simmons on a partnership burn earlier this year.
Well, the benefits of fire are, it's a management tool like no other. In a place like this, in a field, the fire burns away the thatch and really matted down grass, allows more light to hit the floor, allows the wildflowers to compete with some of the grass species, keeps out the encroaching woody vegetation, and then keeps places open for birds and wildlife.
Our program has worked on a variety of planning efforts to try and increase this forest restoration projects. One that we worked on recently was creating an analysis of existing forest health and conditions using the latest satellite data and ecological models for roughly 500,000 acres of national forest down around Blacksburg, Virginia, an Eastern Divide Ranger District. This analysis helps provide the Forest Service with the most up-to-date information to use during project planning and implementation. And while we all really enjoy working in the science realm and being out in the woods, another planning effort we have been involved with is much more about people. We've been the conveners of the George Washington National Forest Stakeholder Group. This group is made up of a group of people with really diverse viewpoints, from wilderness advocates to folks from the timber industry, and includes people that use our national forest for a wide range of recreational activities. TNC has worked with this group to help find common goals, build public support, and collaborate on finding the best way forward to achieve more restoration across our public lands. So you'll remember this photo from earlier. It's a satellite imagery that depicts canopy cover. What's changed on it now, though, is we've outlined areas that we have impacted by fire. The red polygons are actually wildfires. The blue ones are our partnership's control burns. And you can see in those areas, even looking at this scale, you can see much more of those pink blotches and those yellow blotches present. And when we really zoom into one of those burn units, you can see the diverse patches of habitat created. There are many more patches of both the young forest and open canopy woodlands present on the landscape. So this is some drone footage of a controlled burn unit on Forest Service lands over in Bath County. We're coming up just outside the unit, looking into the unit. The unit's roughly 3,000 acres and has been burned 3 times, most recently in 2019. And so as we reach these treetops, you'll see the long flank of Neil Run Mountain here in the distance. And you can see the diverse variety of habitat types and conditions created by the burns. You can see a lot of closed canopy forest. You can see individual trees that were killed, but you can also see patches of open and these of this early successional and these open woodlands habitats. And so here's just a drone photo of one of the units, really highlighting that patchwork of conditions. You can see the early in yellow. It's created this great young forest, and these pink patches of oak woodlands that have been created. Each of these patches is several acres, really creating meaningful habitat across the whole burn unit. So drones have been able to give us a high quality, up close view of our big landscape scale projects. And we've had great support from our members in helping establish our drone program. We really couldn't do it without you. And it's enabled us to do more of this new type of work. James Davis is one of our TNC land stewards based over in the Charlottesville area. He's put a ton of time and effort in becoming a drone pilot, and it's really going to benefit our overall program and allow us to continue to evaluate our restoration efforts at a large scale. However, it's not all high-tech wizardry that allows us to assess the impacts of our work. There's a lot of good old-fashioned boots on the ground field work involved too. Getting out on the ground, going to visit our our vegetation management plots to assess how fire has changed the structure and composition of the vegetation is an important piece of data as well. So a good portion of the knowledge we've talked about today really only exists because of the hard work folks at TNC Virginia and on the Allegheny Highlands team. Nikole and Laurel spent almost the past decade collecting that avian monitoring data. And that means they're getting up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning and driving 35 or 40 minutes over to the mountain to get to listen to birds. So they worked really hard at it. They've also started a vegetation monitoring program, looking at the effects of prescribed fire, the plots we just saw, on structure and composition. That's one of the largest monitoring programs east of the Mississippi. Our whole program has worked with researchers that use Warm Springs Mountain as a learning laboratory on a variety of projects on a number of species, including deer, bear, and bobcats, just to name a few. The map here on the left actually shows a great intersection on the different types of data that we can get using the mountain in this way. So these dark circles are actually bobcat home ranges. And that's from a study that some Virginia Tech students and professors did over on the mountain. And you take those home ranges and you plot them over some work that Jean Lorber has done with doing some analysis on how fire has impacted the mountain. that quantifies and maps fire effects on the forest canopy, it really shows how closely correlated these two are. And so Virginia Tech's research, and using some of Jean, Nikole, and Laurel's research, it really has concluded that bobcats really prefer and really use these areas, this forest habitat that has been burned. So I work over in the Allegheny Highlands, whether it's our traditional land protection, to our research, to our implementation of strategies such as prescribed fire, or helping scale up forest restoration on federal, state, and private lands, not only here in Virginia, but across the Central Alps. I'd encourage all of you, whether you want to learn more about our work with forest, or if you really just want to see some of the most beautiful scenery in Virginia, please come join us over on Warm Springs Mountain in Bath County. We're only a couple hours east of Charlottesville. We'd love the opportunity to share more about our work with you. And with that, we'll be glad to try and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Blair, can't you make this be 2 hours long?
I appreciate it, Margaret.
Great information. Thank you so much. And we're really excited that you've got your whole team here with you as well. And we're getting some really great questions that some will probably be specifically for you. Others you may want to hand to members of your team. And we look forward to watching that process as well. I want to tell you, by the way, that in the chat, you're getting some really happy people who have been having a nice time with the presentation too. Okay, so let's dive right in. And y'all keep the questions coming in the Q&A. Remember, if we can't get to them today, then they will all be answered, and the answers will be shared with the whole group. So Blair, is there any trail maintenance planned for Warm Springs Mountain? Are there volunteers for trail maintenance? How can they get involved with that kind of thing?
Actually, I think I'll let Laurel answer that one.
Sure. We have 3 public access trails on Warm Springs Mountain that are open to the public from dawn to dusk. And we do have volunteer opportunities ongoing year-round for trail monitors up on the preserve, as well as some preserve stewardship. GenDoc maintains a great mailing list to keep everybody up to date about any unique opportunities, volunteer events, or organized work days. But there's always a need on those 3 trails to do some light trail maintenance. So we would love to have you. We'll make sure to include more information about volunteer opportunities in our follow-up.
That's great. Is that something staff can come help with sometimes too, Laurel?
Oh yeah, love to have
come and help with that. That's awesome. I love it when we get to do little exchange programs between the landscapes. Wonderful. Okay, let's see here. How do you deal with the spread of invasive species?
You want to take that one, Nikole?
Well, yep. So we have a pretty targeted invasive species management program on Warm Springs Mountain, and we mostly focus our non-native invasive species control in our fire restoration areas. And we have targeted species such as bittersweet, autumn olive, and tree of heaven, species we know really like that kind of disturbance. And we try to focus on small populations where they don't have much steam yet, or vectors in areas where we know we're going to get a lot of it spread. We work mostly with contractors and some participating agreement money from the Forest Service to treat those areas. And one benefit we've noticed is that in our monitoring, we don't have a lot of non-native invasive species that get established in areas where we're burning, where they're not already there. And that's why we've decided to target areas where they already are, where we know disturbance will create their spread, such as roads and trail corridors.
Thank you. Some of these are being submitted anonymously, which is totally great. And then every once in a while we have a name with them. So Peter asks, he says, when I hike in Shenandoah National Park, the woods look sick, downed trees everywhere. What is killing so many trees? Thank you.
Jean, you want to take a shot at that one?
Sure. Peter, part of what you're seeing is just natural succession. So I wouldn't categorize Shenandoah as sick overall. It's a forest that in large part originated, 100-ish years ago. And in many cases, there were open fields and, there's some human land use up there. And so the forests that grow back after that tend to be populated early on by Virginia pine, ash, species that are the colonizers or the pioneer species. And they reproduce quickly and grow quickly, but they die young. And so part of what you're seeing when I go up on Shenandoah, right, is that first wave of forest species kind of coming to the natural end of their life cycle. And so what replaces them, and what has replaced them, obviously, is a lot of oak. And, when I'm up at Shenandoah, most of the oak that I see is in pretty good condition. Some of the oak's middle-aged, late middle-aged. So you're starting to see some mortality for sure, and that will continue. But overall, I think a lot of what you're seeing is just natural succession. Some dead trees are totally part of the system, and lots of species use them. So we don't mind seeing that, in moderation.
A little perspective, that'll be helpful to me too.
Add to that a little bit. We did have an emerald ash borer outbreak in the last few years, so we are seeing a lot more dead ash in the area. And then, as you probably are familiar, our hemlocks experienced hemlock woolly adelgid. So some of our more north-facing slopes and riparian areas where stream edges are, you're seeing a lot more dead hemlock as well.
What do you think the next 10 years will look like for your program?
I'll jump in on that one. I think we'll really continue a lot of our partnership work. If we want to make these large landscape scale changes, we're going to have to be working on public lands. So we're going to continue to work with our Forest Service partners, with our state partners, to try to implement these large landscape level burns. One thing I think we do a really good job of is using adaptive management, putting something into place, trying something out, and then going back and see what kind of outcomes we had. So as we move through the next several years, we're just going to continue to evaluate what we're doing, what kind of impacts we're having, and if there's things we can do better.
Lofty, that's great. Okay, let's see. Oh, somebody asked, can you tell me what WTREX is and talk about women in the fire world?
So I guess I should caveat that with what is TREX. TREX stands for Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, and people come together from all over the country and the world to trade skills. So maybe you come and you want to work on a fire skill that you as a fire practitioner don't have, and maybe you have something to teach to other folks. So it's generally a group of about, well, it varies from 20 to 80 people that come together for a 2-week fire assignment, like a wildfire assignment, like you would see out west and other places. And they do a lot of learning and burning together. WTREX in particular stands for Women in Fire Training Exchange. And it was started back in 2017. Myself and Laurel are both participants, and I am on the management team. And it's really designed to bring women together all over the nation and the world to build networks in an environment that's often male dominated, the fire service, to help women build skills, create networks, and work together. We oftentimes on the fire line find ourselves being only one or two. So we wanted to create an environment where women could come together and talk about their struggles and build confidence and courage in the fire service.
Exciting. That's great. All right, let's see, along the lines of burning, Ellen asks, how much has this year's burn program been affected by all the wet weather?
Nikole, you
I'm
want to?
happy to take that one as well. Sure. Well, it's actually been pretty good for us because we're not quite into our burn season yet. But with all the snow and rain, that means that the creeks will be flowing really well, and we can use natural barriers very safely and confidently to stop as our fire breaks. And also sometimes when we're burning, we might use them to just slow fire down or stop it in places where we don't want it to go. So the wet weather in this instance is really helpful to us. Our burn season generally starts around mid-March and we go into the first or second week of May, historically.
Thanks. All right. How does a landowner with a restriction from cutting down trees due to some type of tax abatement go about getting a controlled burn as Blair described?
Margaret, I think probably the best step would be for them just to give us a call and we could kind of explore that a little bit farther. Just depends on what they've got in place, depends on what conditions they might have. And we could help them figure out if there's a private contractor out there that might help them get a burn done. But the best thing to do would be just contact us, and we'll be sending our contact information on information after the webinar.
Cool. Okay, great. All right, let's see. Philip asks, does Warm Springs Mountain serve as part of a larger wildlife migration corridor?
Who wants to take that one?
Sure, it's a great question. Yeah, if you remember that the figure, the graphic that Blair showed early on, the migrations and motion graphic that showed the spine of the Appalachians, or the center of the Appalachians, really being this great kind of highway for wildlife as they adapt to climate change. And so the science behind that is, as it sounds like, it's very much about how species can move and adapt and are, migrating year to year, but also thinking about migration kind of as an Uber concept over decades as climate changes. Where do species go if they need that cool environment? They go uphill and they might head north. So we're blessed. This part of the Appalachians is blessed with a lot of contiguous forest that's not fragmented by too many roads, too many subdivisions. So it's kind of the integrity that it has because of that, because of those large unbroken expanses of forest, are really a benefit, are really one of the hallmarks of why the Central Appalachians is so important. And it's important to note that, what I call fragmenting features were really these permanent non-forest openings where there's a lot of human, activity. That's different than the disturbance we've been talking about of, prescribed burning or timber harvesting sometimes. So anyway, it's an important distinction. But yeah, this part of the Appalachians is definitely an important kind of migration corridor, both in year to year, but then also we believe, scientists believe, as the climate changes over the next few decades.
Thanks, Jean. And I want to remind our guests that if you do have questions, to submit them using the Q&A function and instead of the chat, which you can find both of them at the bottom of the page. Q&A gets the questions directly to us, and the chat can get embedded in other conversations. So keep them coming. And while we're on the topic of migration, or critters that do migrate, David wants to know, do you consult with private landowners who are not in a TNC easement? We are involved in a handful of government programs, including the golden winged warbler.
Sure, I can take that one. So we do have our work with golden wing warblers. We do have some projects on easements, and then we're also exploring the role of fire as a tool for creating that much needed golden wing warbler habitat. I think that the programs that you're involved in, Working Lands for Wildlife, there are a lot of really great programs that are helping to fund the overlap of good habitat creation and ag lands. And there are some best management practices available for creating that habitat on your private lands. We would love to share that, as well as some of the more recent research coming out about golden winged warbler habitat and needs in the Appalachians. Blair, do you have anything to add for that one?
No, I think you pretty well covered that one, Laurel. Thank you.
I would just like to say, I'd like to brag on some of our partners. In addition to habitat creation, there's some really great research going on one of our easements where they outfit the golden winged warblers with geolocators. This is a very, very tiny, charismatic little bird. And they're wearing these little teeny tiny backpacks that don't interfere with their migration. And these birds are going down to South America, and then they're returning to these areas that we have right here in Highland and Bath counties. So they have really, really high loyalty to these sites. And so we definitely want to encourage that good habitat for a bird that is in deep decline.
And is so dear to your heart. Truly is. That's wonderful. Yeah. And shout out for the partners. We do nothing in a vacuum, that's for sure. Okay, another critter question. Cab would like to know, have species like deer ticks affected the wildlife populations in the area?
Hey, Cab, I'm really not sure if deer ticks have impacted the populations of wildlife in the area or not. It's something we could definitely look into, talk to partners about. On the wildlife front, I will say, though, that our prescribed burns really have benefited wildlife. When you spend time up on the mountain and you get to spend time in those areas that we've had lots of fire impacts, you really do see a ton more wildlife. So I'll check into that and get back in touch with you. Thank you.
And if I could add to that, there is some emerging research around prescribed fire and tick populations, specifically the spread of disease. And it is emerging, but it is looking like prescribed fire at the right scale is a tool for reducing the spread of tick-borne diseases among wildlife and us.
Cool. Okay, now we got a chestnut question. Back to trees. Have there been, it's a two-parter actually, and the second part is a quickie answer, I think, but have there been any local efforts concerning restoration, hybridization of the American chestnut? And someone else has asked if the chestnuts behind Jean are in the region we're discussing.
Well, I'm happy to take the first part, and then Jean can answer the other question. We have been working a little bit with the American Chestnut Foundation to help provide some DNA from fruit-bearing trees that are on Warm Springs Mountain as they try to move forward with creating some more blight-resistant chestnut strains.
Yeah, and the sprouts behind these are chestnut sprouts. So as most of y'all probably on this call know, that you've probably seen chestnut sprouts, or maybe even a tree, something tree sized in the woods. And typically they might even bear fruit, but many times the fruit is it's not viable, or the nuts are not there. But this is really common. It's a good example. What is behind me? Sorry, I'm on opposite. There we go. What's behind me? The idea that, or the concept that hardwood tree species, and many, hardwood tree species are really prolific sprouters. And so this is a chestnut sprout in one of the Forest Service burn units, I believe, down near Blacksburg. And this is very common. We see chestnut sprouting, we see oak sprouting, we see maple sprouting. And, as we were talking about before, eventually what we expect to see, what the science tells us, is that eventually some, oaks will be a little bit better at resprouting after that third, fourth, fifth fire, something like that. But yeah, lots of prolific sprouting, and American chestnut is among those that are prolific.
It's a beautiful photo. All right. Let's see. Oops, I just lost my place here. Oh, Florence would like to know, what is the science saying about how best to replant clear-cut or heavily timbered forest areas?
Jean, you want to take that one as our on-site forester?
Sure. Almost former forester. I haven't. Because the Appalachians and really most of the eastern forest is, the precipitation, rainfall is not a limiting factor. We have very lush forests. And because of that, we typically have pretty robust tree growth after disturbance, whether that's a timber harvest or fire, et cetera. So typically having trees growing, especially in the Appalachians, I'll say, trees growing back after a clear cut or after any sort of timber harvest is not an issue. You have trees, tens of thousands of stems per acre. It gets a little dicier. Is it the right species that you want? It's typically, many times it's all native or many natives, tens of thousands of native stems, maybe some invasives on some sites, but it's, is it as much oak as there was before? Probably not. Is it other species that maybe don't have as much wildlife or biodiversity value like red maple? Probably. And so part of what we focus on and what the Forest Service focuses on when they do timber harvesting, et cetera, is to manage that regrowth after a timber harvest. And so you can favor oaks by selecting around young oaks and thinning out around them when they're little. So, big picture, trees growing back after timber harvest is pretty automatic. The right blend of trees, the quote unquote right blend of trees, that takes a little bit of finesse sometimes, but that's what a lot of our management restoration focuses on.
All right. Andrew asks, are landowners who wish to introduce disturbance on their lands in these middle Appalachian counties reliant on programs that pay for a logging company to come in and patch clear cut, then hire someone to come burn, or is there some other viable approach?
I'll jump in on that one. Andrew, it really just all depends. I think the key to it all is getting sunlight on the ground. So however you're talking about doing that. In some instances, if you have a little bit more timber, you can actually have a timber company to pay you, come in, do small timber harvests, and then manage that with fire or herbicide to get back the species that you're looking for. Another option is just use fire. It can be a little bit more challenging and take a little bit more time, but you can hire a contractor to come in and help you start doing some work like that. There's great options to learn more about it. You can reach out to us. You can reach out to a biologist with Department of Wildlife Resources, and they'll be glad to come out, talk to you, see what kind of options you've got, and see the best way to move forward.
Cool. All right. How do you handle controlled burns during droughts?
I'm happy to take that one. So we have a lot of parameters that we work under when we do a controlled burn. We start with a burn plan, which we also call a prescription, and we work under certain parameters in that prescription. So we do monitor, we work with the Weather Service a lot, and we also monitor soil indexes, so soil moisture levels. And if the soil moisture level is too low, or we've been in a period of a long time without rain, then we will make decisions based on those conditions, whether or not we can burn. Sometimes it's site specific. We might be having a drought in one part of the state, but not in another part, and we can still continue burning because those sites are just, maybe they have a marshy area where it holds a little bit more water. So it's really site variable. And then also we follow our prescriptions, but we're actually mandated by law to follow those prescriptions. And I also want to put in a plug for our state Department of Forestry. If you're interested in doing some control burning on your own lands, you can reach out to your Department of Forestry, your county forester, and they are really, we have some really fantastic people here in the Bath and Rockbridge area that can help you plan a prescribed fire.
Great, that's great, thank you, excellent. This is seasonally related as well. This is somebody's got bird nesting season in mind. They ask, why would you burn during bird nesting season in spring instead of in the October, November time?
I can start on that one. So the research shows us the tree rings that you remember from Blair's presentation show us that historically most of the fire that moved through the landscape happened in late winter and early spring. So that's the time that the conditions are most right for our burns, but we're really trying to have more seasonal variability. And so after the leaves fall off in November, we can often get these later season burns and then the late winter burns. Ultimately, in these high elevation areas in the Appalachians, when we're burning in March and April, the migratory birds are certainly making their way back to us, but many are not. There's not a whole lot of overlap in those migratory birds nesting. However, the ground nesters, there's some research around wild turkey and prescribed fire, and that research really shows that the benefits far outweigh the costs as far as that little bit of overlap between that turkey nesting season. And the National Wild Turkey Federation has come out to say that they are very much in favor of burning because that condition created that is really underrepresented on the landscape is really, really crucial in the sustainability of these bird species. Anecdotally, and the research also suggests this, when Nikole and I are up on the mountain and we're monitoring the bird populations following these fires, it's the units that have had the most fire where we just can't even keep up with the bird songs that we're IDing mostly by ear. And so if you're a birder, we invite you to come out and see for yourself in late May is probably one of the best times to just hear an incredible diversity of birds using these units.
That's awesome. That's an awesome invitation. And we've got time for one more question. And I think you've just put us perfectly in line, Laurel. The question is basically, how can I visit?
Yeah, I'll start that one and then let Blair close it out if he has any final comments. So as Blair said, we're about 2 hours west of Charlottesville and 2.5 or 3 hours from Northern Virginia, depending on your traffic situation. So it's really an easy way to get out of the city. We guarantee you can do social distancing over here in Bath County. It is really, really forested. So we invite you to the preserve, which is open year round, those 3 access trails. We'll make sure to send out more information about how you can access those trails and some of the interpretive signage and materials along the way to learn a little bit more about our fire program and get to see what that looks like on the ground. We'll also make sure to share some information about the broader area. So we have those trails, but they also connect to hundreds of miles of trails on the National Forest, State Forest, and other protected lands. And we'll even share some of our insider tips on the best breweries and restaurants and camping spots. Blair, anything else?
No, that really covered it, Laurel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We'd love to have you over there. It's a part of the world that's just amazingly easy to fall in love with. So thank you all again very much for the time.
It's great. Yes, thanks for these excellent questions, folks. We are just right at our time limit, so Blair and his team will respond to any lingering questions after the program, and we'll share those answers as well as some other helpful information in the follow-up email. We just love sharing this wonderful work with all of you from around the state. Well, all of you may be from beyond the state, but our work is around the state. And I'm sure you know we could not accomplish the work without support from folks like you. So thank you, thank you. Y'all please take good care, and thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you on March 30th when we'll talk about solar siting in Virginia. Have a pleasant afternoon, and thanks again.
Thanks, Al.